has heard parts of this. I'm going to extend certain parts, add certain parts, and change some things around. And actually, with some of the research that I'll be mentioning, there's part of the audience in Virginia that actually has seen some of the research that I've done as well. Just a little heads up. As I mentioned, I'm trying to convince everybody that they should do an international exchange experience. It's one of my major goals today. And the other part is just to kind of link my research with what the projects that I'll be doing here and that we're working on here in the column. I'm just showing this slide just to kind of show where I'm from. Some of you who went to the presentation I did, I think last week now, may recall this, but this is of course our Atlantic coast. You can see where Washington, D.C. is, and you can see Virginia underneath that. And you'll see that when we pull up Virginia, that's Richmond. That's where my university's from. That's where I live close to. And this is a building that I work in. It's a new building. If you ever come to Virginia, please let me know. I'll take you for a tour of our new building. We just moved into it in July. And this is one of our instructional labs. Everything in the building is new. That's how it happens. We probably don't get a new building maybe every 50 years. So it's not normal to get a new building. It's very unusual, and it was our turn, thank God, and we are here in this building. I also want to talk about where I am today, right? I'm in Natal, so our folks in Virginia can see I live 4 blocks from this beach on the 8th floor, so I look over the beach, which is stunning and amazing. I spent maybe 45 minutes this morning just staring and having a cup of coffee. It's really tremendous. This is my wife and I. We went to the dunes and just to enjoy that afternoon. Pretty special. This is Pipa Beach. I've been there for a 3-day weekend. Had a wonderful time. Hassan and I can't tell you all of what we happened there, but we really had a wonderful time. The sunsets here are amazing. The sunrise is amazing here. And to get a picture of a beautiful sunset or sunrise is really, everybody has them on their phone, right? Yeah. Everybody's looking for the next beautiful sunrise and sunset. And then this week I went to this beach, which is, it's the Elbow. I just remember.
Elbow Beach?
Elbow Beach. Another beautiful beach, and there are many other beaches that I'm planning to visit as well. One of the things I really like are the flowers here. They're so beautiful. They're so dynamic. I'm not really a flower guy, but when I see something in nature that's amazing to look at, of course I want to look at it. So these are just flowers that I've seen when I'm walking either across campus or throughout my neighborhood, even on the streets or parks. Here's the track here at this campus, on our campus. This is also the soccer field where the U.S. World Cup soccer team came to practice. So 2014, when the World Cup was in Brazil, the U.S. was actually here and trained here and played in the stadium that's in the city here. I just thought I'd show you. It's a beautiful track. It's a beautiful facility. It's really wonderful. Just a tour through some of the buildings. Most of the buildings have hallways that are open air. So it's beautiful. The temperature's perfect. And you just walk from classroom to class. I think that's Lucas showing me around on the left there, for sure. But we have other visitors that come to campus, like this iguana, and we just walk by and there's an iguana. We don't have that where I'm from, but it's really fun to see. This is my wife in one of the beautiful gardens on campus. As you walk through campus, there's just a beautiful garden with really unique plants. My wife is just standing there. I think she helps the picture. I ran Sagui.
Yep.
Sagui. I ran into 3 or 4 of these fellows when I was going down to the ocean to swim. Every once in a while, if you go by the park, the big parks, you'll see a sagui hanging out. They're really cool. I thought it was a squirrel. Yeah, it was a squirrel. I'm like, boy, that's a funny looking squirrel. And then they move, of course, differently. So I stared at it, and sure enough, you know, I noticed these hairs coming from where the ears might be. And I said, that is not a squirrel. And then here we are in the NeuroMove lab with with Dr. Hassan El-Sangeji and Dr. Daniel Machado, where I'll be doing my work. So we went through this question to start off with, and I'll give you my response. And you'll see that it's identical to what you said, right? It's very, very similar. However, mine is also in the context, like Sharon mentioned, I've had an opportunity to travel a little bit. One of the first major travel adventures that we have linked to my research was to go to England. And these are the White Cliffs of Dover, where we collected two significant research projects, and I think some of you know the stories behind those. But I've also been to Greece, and this is a picture of Athens, and from there we just decided to go to the Greek Isles for a little bit. Very beautiful, wonderful adventure. And also Western Australia. This is in Perth. When I was out there, I was at Edith Cowan University for a little bit, and they have these things on campus, like bouncing around in the evening before sunset. Very different than what we have in Virginia and what we have here in the top. And I've been to Thailand, especially in Chiang Mai. I spent a couple weeks in Chiang Mai teaching kind of a mini course, and they have elephants, so I decided to go for a ride, kind of crazy. And the temples up in the north of Thailand are really amazing, and went to go see, they're just magnificent art pieces, really. And Turkey, this is in Istanbul. Went to a conference out in more of the central western area. This is in Bolu, and it's just gorgeous. The countryside, and this campus is on top of a hilltop, and you have to take maybe a mile and a half, 2 mile, I guess that would be 3,000 meter road up to this beautiful campus. But Mexico, these are actually pyramids, and outside of Mexico City, and had an opportunity to go to these pyramids, and there's a group of scholars that were doing another kind of workshop there a while ago. That has, of course, impacted my views of the importance or the benefits of international travel. And so here are what I would talk about: personal growth and development, becoming a better you, right? And many of you were kind of reflecting on that, right? You grow, you change, you evolve. And travel can provide that opportunity. A new cultural understanding, many of you talked about this, right? By interacting with different people, eating different foods, right? I guess I should add that drinking different alcohol, right? I can add that. For me, listening to different music, I just like listening to different music and different sounds, and being exposed to different types of art. We try to see a museum in every city that we go to. It really is, for us, it's eye-opening and stunning often to see how different artists from different countries present their view of the world, right, in whatever art they're doing. Seeing and experiencing a different natural environment, this is also a big deal for me and us. We like just going to see nature and communing with nature, and also seeing how the culture interacts with nature, and for us, how the culture protects nature. We're just interested in seeing how that works in different countries. And then learning a different language. For me, learning a different language is not so easy, but you learn so much about the culture by learning about the language, right? And so to me, that link is a really an amazing treasure to investigate how the language was developed, why they use that word. Of course, sometimes a word that translate to our language means something completely different in a different language. But it's really tremendous, tremendous experience. And new lasting memories and experiences. It just adds to who you are by having these memories and experiences. An appreciation for diversity and enhanced creativity. Differences are kind of the flavor of the world, right? They're the amazing opportunities to see things differently and grow and make your brain explode. Hopefully not, but figuratively. And that, to me, leads to enhanced creativity. It just leads to thinking about things a little differently and having a different lens in how the world works. And then traveling often challenges your beliefs and values in life, and some of you mentioned that. And to me, that's really intriguing when I go, oh, wait a minute, whoa, you can do it that way? Right? That works. For me, that's a tremendous growing and learning experience. Everything that you all said either matches in there or should be added to this list, right? If it doesn't kind of fit in there, it should be added to this list. for sure. Well, I'm here on a Fulbright Scholar, so I'm just going to mention a little bit about the Fulbright Scholar and then jump into some of my research and why I'm here. But James William Fulbright was a senator from Arkansas, and he developed the Fulbright Scholars Act, which is now, of course, a law, in 1946. He was also the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee from 1959 to 1974, and he's been the longest serving chair on that committee. He studied at Oxford University. He's from Arkansas, finished his undergraduate degree, I believe it was Arkansas, if I remember correctly, but then went to Oxford, so had an international experience, and then came back. Here's a quote from William Fulbright. The essence of intercultural education is the acquisition of empathy, the ability to see the world as others see it, and to allow for the possibility that others may see something we have failed to see, or may see it more accurately. It's just broadening your vision of the world, of who you are, of how things can be, of how things work. And again, to me, that's a tremendous educational experience that we can't get from a book, right? It's hard to pick up a book. As a matter of fact, I did a lot of research about Natal. Before I got here, not close, right? Not close. The views, the beach are much better than what you can see in a picture. But the people, right, are much different than whatever I read about, right? They're real, you know, and they're really nice, right? Very welcoming and warm. So the Fulbright program is organized through the United States of America Department of State. I think this is important because then now you can understand, or this can highlight kind of where the purpose of the Fulbright program comes from. So to increase mutual understanding between the people of the United States and the people of other countries. That's the purpose, right? Now I'm here doing scholarship, right, and research. And that's what gets you in the door. But this is the real purpose. Isn't it interesting? In addition, development of peaceful relations. This is the core of this office in the Fulbright program. Very, very interesting. And I think I've been peaceful.
So far, so good.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. 160 countries worldwide the program serves. 400,000 participants have had an opportunity to participate in Fulbright programs. And approximately 8,000 competitive merit-based grants are awarded annually in most academic disciplines and fields of study. Those 8,000 include, I think, about four programs for faculty, but students are the primary beneficiaries of these programs. It goes primarily to students, undergraduate and graduate students. All right, here we go. This is what I'm going to talk about today. First of all, I want to make a point about the critical importance of physical activity and mental health. All of you know this. So I'm going to go pretty smoothly through this, or pretty quickly through this part, because I think we already bought into it, right? You're not an audience that I have to convince on this topic. Fulbright Part 1, I'll talk about an exercise experience that enhances affect, positive emotion, will increase adherence. That's kind of the topic that I'll approach first. And then underneath that, really, a big area is the role of reflective evaluation and automatic affective valuation. How decision-making versus impulse or automatic processes interact to result in the exercise experience, but also exercise adherence. And then strategies to support a positive exercise experience. I'm going to go through that very quickly, but that'll be a part of it because it's actually integrated into the affective experience that I'll be talking about of physical activity. And then Fulbright Part 2, what if we stimulate the brain? Right? Our focus is affect and the brain and how it's triggering and how things are happening and why you're experiencing an affective response during physical activity, how that's linked, but it's really about the brain. For me, a crazy thought would be to stimulate the brain, right? And that crazy thought came initially from a student, and now it's being supported through research with Dr. Machado. Physical activity is critically important to health. We know this stuff, right? And we know that we're all convinced that physical activity improves every aspect of health, right? And not quite, but I think it's pretty close, right? And mental health as well, and health behavior. So it's really broad, but we're convinced of this. Clearly there's a plethora, much data, many studies on this, and I think we've convinced much of the world that this is important. Yet global estimates reveal that 27.5 of adults across the globe are still inactive. And in Latin American countries, 40.6% of adults are inactive. So still we have this tremendous hurdle to try to get people to be active. And my bias is that human beings inherently enjoy physical activity. A graduate student of mine drew this for me because I would always be talking about, I don't understand how people don't love physical activity. I just think it's normal and natural to be physically active, and I often talk about children and how they demonstrate their joy with physical activity and movement. When they're just always trying and reaching and soon crawling and hanging on trees and swinging on the swing and chasing a dog or a seagull, that's just normal and natural, physical activity to experience the world. Something happens along the way where we're not convinced that physical activity is what is normal, natural, and we ought to be participating in. What this has led to is, what, maybe 300,000 years ago or so, and to this development into close to where we are today. But I would argue that from this position, the second to last position, folks in Virginia can't see this, but this position, can they see me now? Probably.
Both.
To here, that's probably 70 years of time, right? Versus back here at the start, that's 300,000 years ago at least. And some argue twice that, right? But only in the last 70 years have we seen us go to the extreme of suffering from obesity. These are the numbers from 2022 and obesity rates in the United States. Nobody's really surprised, right? Nobody's really surprised. But part of this is linked to inactivity as well. Here's the overall prevalence of obesity in the U.S. is 41.9%. We have the greatest number of obese individuals in the world, right? And here's Brazil, 25.2%, the fifth greatest number of obese individuals in the world. So still a tremendous problem, but a pretty big difference between the two countries. If we look at life expectancy, and you'll see where I'm going with this point in a moment. Life expectancy in the United States for males is 73.2, and for females is 79.1. If we look at most of the other highly industrialized and affluent countries in the world, we're lower than all of them, right? Similarly, for males and females, we're lower than all of them. As a matter of fact, if we look at these comparable countries, and comparable on healthcare and many other variables, but we see that 80 years old for men, and we're at 73.2. That's a lot of years, right? And if we look at females, 79.1 versus 84.7. That's a lot of years that, in a sense, we're giving up for a reason we really don't understand. I would always argue it's linked to physical activity, but that's because I'm here talking to you, right? And that's what you do if you're in our field. Life expectancy for Brazil is 75.9, men is 72.4, pretty close here, right? And females, pretty close. A little bit higher on females, a little bit lower on males, right? Let's go a little further. These are now the averages of the male and females. This is life expectancy for males and females in the United States. Again, showing that we are below all of these other countries that have similar economic and health benefits and all those things. If we look at the health spending per capita, per person, how much we invest, here's the U.S., right? Here's the rest of the world. Isn't that interesting? There's nobody who complains about healthcare more than the people in the U.S. We're always complaining. And there are a lot of things to complain about. Having said that, we invest far more. And for many reasons. I'm not going to spend time here talking about all the possible reasons that this is the case. But for many reasons, we see this difference in the data. So let's look at Brazil. Life expectancy in Brazil, we covered this, it's 79.9. Look how, I think that's really close, right? But look at the expenditures for healthcare. Isn't that amazing? That's very, very interesting. So I think these kinds of comparisons just bring to light what is going on? How is this working? Why do we see this? And it's a great question, I think, to continue to try to address. In addition, exercise and mental health is huge. And did you have a question?
Yes. Can you return one?
Sure.
This amount is public health investment?
Public health investment. Yes, public health investment. And I wish I knew more about that number, but it's public health investment. That's the easiest way to collect the data. That's where they can collect it. Private is much more difficult to collect.
But ain't in US all the investment paid by the subject?
No.
No?
No. That's a good question, and it's hard to answer in the U.S. Let me put it that way. So my health insurance is through primarily, at least 50%, goes through my employer. Goes through my employer pays half, then I pay half. My half is taken out of my paycheck automatically. I can't say don't take that money. Automatically goes out. So I don't view that. It's hard for me to say that that's public or private, right? I have to pay it. They're putting in half. That's but we can count that in these dollars pretty easily. We can count these in the dollars pretty easily, right? So it's very complex. I would argue that it's very complex on the 701 as well, right? And it's so we can just only look at the numbers and then take many years, not today, but take many years to try to figure out where those differences might be and how to tease those out. But exercise and mental health has been focused on more and more. It's been one of my research interests since I started in graduate school, probably undergraduate programs, because I always felt personally that there was a strong link between my mental health and physical activity, right? It was my personal kind of goal or agenda. If we look further into how we view the importance of exercise adherence, Healthy People 2010 was the last, these Healthy People documents come out every 10 years. The last time that physical activity was focused on in terms of adherence and the importance of adherence was in 2010. It doesn't appear in 2020, but here we see it talks about starting out slowly with an activity that is enjoyable, is central to the adoption and maintenance, right? So see, they're prescribing and suggesting this is what should be done when you're helping a person start an exercise program. They go further and state, if the experience is not pleasurable, one should expect the volunteer to drop out. Pleasurable, pleasurable. That's really my focus in my research and my focus here, one of my focus areas here. And then it says roughly 80 to 90% of individuals in exercise programs report that exercise makes them feel better, but 50% drop out. Right? So they all say, feels great, I love it when I'm done with exercise, I'm elated, I'm uplifted, I feel energized, but 50% drop out, right? Within a certain specific time, and usually it's a few months. Interestingly, both Dr. Machado and El Sanguetti have looked at some research here in Brazil. And if you look at here, the summary of this figure, which is actually pretty interesting to look at, I think there are over 400 subjects in this study, if I'm not mistaken, so it's a nice number of individuals to track. After 3 months, only 43% of participants continued their membership, right? And after 6 months, 28% continued their membership. That's a pretty big drop-off, right? That's a pretty big drop-off. And it's the kind of drop-off that all of us interested in promoting physical activity and health should be not only aware of, but should realize we might want to do something about this, right? We might want to do something about this. So one area is to look back at that pleasurable experience, right? That pleasurable experience, that's one area that can be looked at. And when we talk about pleasurable, we're really talking about emotion and how emotion is used in motivation, that link between the two. Pleasure has what we refer to as a hedonic value. meaning it's valuable to us because it feels good. That's a simple way of looking at it, and can serve as a common currency to make behavioral choices based upon various motivations. Not too hard. Like, I can go out with this group of friends on Friday night tonight, or I can go out with this group of friends on Friday night tonight. With this group of friends, they're they know my family, and I've known them forever, and all those things. With this group of friends, they're new friends, right? And I need new friends. I'm in a new city or a new place, right? That's the facts, right? What's going to drive me to pick one or the other? The research on emotion is very clear. It's the one that I think is going to make me feel better. We do the same thing with food. We often look at food and say, oh, this food's good for me, and or this food, and we choose the one that makes me feel better, right? Not just flavor. It's very interesting. But it becomes this common currency that we can use to find out why a person is motivated to behave one way or the other. And then here, emotions are less encapsulated than other psychological states, as evident in their global effects on virtually all aspects of cognition. What that means is almost whatever you're thinking, we're often driven by the emotion behind it, more so than what you're thinking about. And I think that, for me, that's very, very interesting when we talk about physical activity itself. So if we're trying to figure out strategies to support a positive exercise experience, I'm just going to throw up a couple here, but I'm going to focus in on one in a moment. The first thing is that each person is unique. That's the first thing. So one exercise prescription for all can't work, because when we try to do that for anybody in any health behavior, it doesn't work. So 150 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week at 60 to 80%, it can't work. Starting there, it can't work. Humans aren't like that. Just a clue to where we're going here, right? Identifying the meaningful why to achieve a meaningful goal becomes important. Identifying the meaningful why, this often is where our emotion is anchored, to achieve a meaningful goal, right? So it's not just about doing the physical activity, it's about why are you doing the physical activity? What is pulling you to even start a physical activity program, right? And trying to nurture that and figure out what is motivating and why this person is motivated to move in that direction. I'm not the right person to address this, right? Some of you know this, but I've run 100 miles. This is not normal, right? This is not normal. I'm not your typical American or typical Brazilian, right? I've run 100 miles. This is that, the 100-mile run is crazy. It's just complete insanity all through the mountains, right? Very hot, high altitude. It's a train wreck, right? That's important to understand in terms of why I started doing this research in this area, right? And how I've approached it in trying to understand it. This is part of that trail run. It's really an amazing, here I am finishing, and because of my tremendous run that day, I got a belt buckle. But a tremendous experience nonetheless. But imagine training and then going, it's really, I'm not normal, right? But what does that mean about how I ask research questions related to motivation? That becomes, I think, quite interesting to consider. I've also done 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, run a marathon, and 17th in the country at the national championships, right? So again, not quite normal, a little different. And then I've attempted to swim the English Channel twice. This is a direct line. You actually end up swimming like this. You swim much further because of the currents and changing tide. This is a little bit of what it looked like. So again, that's not normal, right? That's important to appreciate in terms of trying to investigate this. Now, one of the things that I've always felt, again, kind of the mental health side, but also I do physical activity. I've always done physical activity because it makes me feel good when I do it. It's always been my bias. Some of the research now is kind of linking up to that bias and why I've investigated this area. But one of the things that we know is self-selected and affective guided exercise intensities seem to be the most affective, positively affective inducing types of activities. All right? We already know that. The literature is pretty clear there. One of the areas that I started doing research in was to identify the intensity and the physiological variables that help us understand or identify the intensity that we should be exercising to elicit a positive affective response. So in this case, and in this study, we were looking at having runners run 2 hours on the treadmill, right? And they're going to come in fasted, and our goal with a 2-hour run was that they would become hypoglycemic, right? Drop in blood glucose levels at 90 minutes so that it would be miserable, right? It's going to be miserable. I want to be able to document this and see what physiological variables are influencing that misery, right? And so we're going to look at ratings of perceived exertion, because I also wanted to see, a few in the literature were saying how hard you're feeling, how hard you think you're exercising is different than the affective response. So I should see these diverge somewhere along the line. So at 90 minutes, I might feel miserable, but I report that my range of perceived exertion is the same or very close to what it was at 60 minutes and 30 minutes. See how that works? It's a little bit about where we were going. This is the feeling scale that we use that we use in this research. And you can see it's 0 is neutral affect, right? And then +5 or a -5 for the positive and negative affect. So here's, I like to point out that I have black hair. Under this white hair, I have black hair. And that I did have black hair. And this is a while ago. This is actually my dissertation from a while back. And I still had black hair. And here we're drawing blood to look at glucose and lactate and a couple of other catecholamines, for example, in this study. This was a long time ago, so gloves weren't required. It's a very long time ago. Here's some of the data. Within the circle here, very simply, from that 90 to 20 minutes, that's kind of what we're looking at. I can just tell you that we did see a drop in FS of, let's say, 1 unit, and we did see RPE elevate actually a little bit, so we actually didn't quite get what we wanted. I can also tell you, though, that the correlation between the drop in blood glucose level, that was related, drop in blood glucose level, was related to the FS scale, but not related to RPE. So there was some evidence in support of maybe FS and RPE being different. We thought, well, we got to look at exercise intensity. That's really where the answer is. When we change intensities, we're going to see some physiological adjustments as well. Maybe that's where we'll see a change or a shift in affect. So here we're looking at lactate is what I'm circling here. I'm circling these numbers because 4 millimoles of lactate is considered the onset of blood lactate accumulation, right? That's when you're physiologically shifting to more anaerobic sources for ATP production, right? And so that should be where we see the greatest shift or change in affect, right? And so the next data will show that. We see a drop here. It's pretty good. It's not great. RP also is increasing linearly. The rate of increase is kind of close. So now I thought I've got to get even closer to the 4 millimole mark. And so our next study looked at perceptual responses proximal to the onset of blood lactate accumulation. You'll see how we do this, right? Person comes in, they run, we look at RPE, FS. My hair is probably turning a little gray there, unfortunately. We're taking blood samples a little differently here. And then this is our data. Let me point out that this is running speed 1. Right here is the rate at which you have elicited 4 millimoles of blood lactate accumulation. We do this through an analysis and testing all different running intensities, but that's this running intensity. This is an oxygen consumption 10% lower. This is an oxygen 10% higher. And here we see the difference. Here we see the response in affect in the blue relative to RPE in the black. And we see clearly that sure enough, when you go anaerobic, life is miserable, right? But your effort perception simply increases pretty much to a similar relative increase in the amount of work that you're doing, all right? So you feel worse. This was a nice study to show affect is different. And now we might be able to look at affect and understand a little more about how to enhance affect. So we did a number of studies in this area, other studies that I'm not talking about here, and it led to this review. And this review became quite a nice contribution. I always mention Dr. Ekakakis because he took this area of investigation He was my student for a master's degree, but he took this area of investigation and went crazy. He's done far more studies than I have in this area. But he was instrumental in getting me to this point and then helping me write this review article. When we were doing this review article, I wanted to understand what was happening in the brain. This was early on. I wanted to understand all these, what are called exteroceptive and interoceptive stimuli that are going to impact the brain, the amygdala in particular, and perceived affective responses. This was all about this. But what's happening in what parts of the brain are being activated? How does this work? For me, it was kind of a neurophysiology view of this response. I think it's really important that this high road became very, very important in how we process these cues, and in particular, the affective response. And we'll talk about high road versus low road in a moment. But we came up with this model. It's a very simple model. It simply is connecting physiological cues back to the central nervous system, the brain, in which it's going to process. And in this case, it's going to process, looking at the brain here, effort sense, affect, and actual thermal sensations as well, which is another area that I haven't done research in. But we do know that that's a different sensation that's processed centrally. It also suggests that thermal sensations can impact effort sense and affect. Again, not something that's been looked at very much. But you can see all the factors that kind of feed into the processing of affect and RPE. This led us to a study that we published in 2019. It was a funded project to look at exercise testing of adolescents and young adults with sickle cell disease. So with medications in the last 10 to 15 years for sickle cell disease patients, we know that they can live much longer and likely participate in physical activity. But nurses and doctors are very hesitant to prescribe physical activity. This is also having another impact on life expectancy. They're not being physically active. So we wanted to see if affect could be used to identify the point that sickle cell patients become anaerobic, because if they go anaerobic, that's more stress on the sickle cells, which can cause a sickle cell crisis. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. It wasn't mine, but it's a good idea. It was Susan Ameringer's idea, the first author on this paper. But this is what we found, very simply. Red is your FS, and what we're looking for is, if we go across here, is there something during this gas exchange threshold, is what we looked at here. Is there any variable that drops non-linearly, right? Because that could be a tool that we could use. Sure enough, we see this. This blue line is pretty straight, this one, and then we actually see this one. This is a fatigue rating that also does it. But because I'm interested in affect, I just mentioned that the affect here might be a critical tool in helping people regulate the intensity of exercise so that they do not go anaerobic, and this is a population that can benefit from it, right? Pretty cool. I think a really nice contribution and one to talk about, right? However, I want to link now a little bit of what's going on during the physical activity with what happens after. Remember that elevated affect after physical activity. This is a really nice review that was done a few years back. And let's take a look. Positive changes in affective responses during moderate intensity exercise are reliably linked to future physical activity behavior. This is a summary of the research in this field. That's the point I've been trying to make. And Rhodes and Cates have come out and said there's data that supports this, right? In addition, they state post-exercise affective responses, that elevated affect that we feel post, had generally no relationship with behavior. This is really good. So for some in the class, when I go and have a few drinks in the evening, I have an elevated feeling, right? I have an elevated feeling, right? And I enjoy myself and have a great time. And sometimes if I continue to drink, when I wake up the next morning, I don't feel an elevated affect. I feel pretty darn miserable. However, the next weekend comes, and a friend asked me to go get it, and I'm drinking again, right? Not because of the post-affective experience that was a drop, but because of the during. You see how that works? Quite interesting. and a quite an interesting parallel to what motivates behavior, So I've talked a little bit about the self-selective affective guided exercise intensity. I want to now talk about how affect influences motivation and how other variables kind of have to be considered. And in particular, something called reflective evaluation and the affective response, and how you'll see that this interacts with our affective response. So the first thing, I don't want to spend too much time here because I could spend an hour or two just talking about this. It's very, very interesting. So I'll skip it. No, just kidding. Cognitive appraisal about exercise and an affective response to exercise. The way we've been operationally defining this in the research lab is RPE versus affect, right? That's how we're operationally defining it. We have cognitions about affect as well. So we have cognitions related to affect. We haven't brought that in. But we have these cognitions, and we have automatic valuations about or attached to the activity or the cognition or the experience. All of this now is going to lead and or predict exercise behavior, right? And we're trying to figure all this out, because if we can alter this, people are going to, and elevate it, they're going to exercise more. That's what we're trying to do. We can figure out how to do that. So if we look at something called the affective reflective theory, we're going to talk about reflective processes. These are action plans and really thought plans, right, for what you're going to do. And we're going to also counter that or see how these interact with automatic processes. These are emotions. And they come often from unconscious or implicit thoughts that we're not always aware of, right? We're going to see how these two kind of have to balance each other out or go to battle over the experience of physical activity. An action plan or a reflective process about physical activity could be, I want to lose weight, exercise never helps, I hate exercise, it always leads to back pain, see where I'm going, right? And that's going to influence the affective experience for the next physical activity, right? So that means if we have those, we might want to go back and address those before we try to jump into physical activity again, otherwise we're going to end up with the same result. Although the reflective, C down below here, although the reflective system may inhibit contrary action impulses, right? Contrary action impulses, these kind of emotional impulses, automatic action impulses often prevail. So although this reflective system can inhibit action impulses, it can slow those down, change those, make you do things you don't really want to do, you don't have an positive affective response to. We know that automatic action impulses often prevail. It's really the automatic affective response that's directing or dictating behavior here, right? So again, if we're going to overcome that, we got to focus on these. Well, Brand and Ekakakis came in with this model. I don't want to focus too much on this. We can again spend a good lecture on this. But we have this reflective evaluation and we have this automatic affective evaluation, and they're going to lead to behavior, right? And so what we now have to realize is one of the phrases used here, or this term here, encoded affect and cognition. This is, he actually puts them together here. I don't really like this, but it's important in that he's suggesting that they're encoded, they're already programmed, right? So they don't have to be conscious. They're already there. That's important because now I have to do a lot of work to create to change this reflective evaluation here. And then we have this automatic association, and this association is linked to an affective response. Right? Exercise is terrible. Exercise makes me feel terrible, maybe, afterwards. Or exercise, my motivation for exercise always ends in no positive results, right? And so all of those are affective factors that can negatively impact our motivation to exercise again. I stumbled into this article and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. He's talking about, this is Dr. Ilsangeji again here, he's talking about, he and his colleagues are talking about positive implicit associations. That's this area of actually cognition linked to affect, right? And automatic, so it leans more on the affective side of things. And how these predict physical activity affective responses during exercise. This is really cool, right? So for me, it was like, whoa, wow, wait a minute, let me see what he's doing here. And that's what motivated me to say, I think I want to learn a little more about this. So I'm going to send Dr. Acevedo an email telling him that he's wonderful. That's what we do. That's how you start a conversation. Yeah. There you go. For those in Virginia, Dr. Acevedo is here. So we're chuckling. But and ask him if he'd like to maybe work together and collaborate through this Fulbright Award. And sure enough, in this study, participants who had more positive implicit associations toward physical activity reported higher affective responses during exercise and engaged in more moderate to vigorous physical activity. A really nice, tight little study showing this a lot of these associations that I've been talking about in getting to this. Our research here is taking this a step further. I won't be talking about that right now. One of the reasons is we keep adjusting things and we keep pilot testing. We've gone through 6 subjects and we're still thinking, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll try, wait, we have to think about this. So when we get a little closer to nailing it down, in terms of protocol, we'll be able to define it more on the project that we're doing. I'm just going to put this up here. I'm not going to talk about it today, but there in the literature, there are a number of strategies that we can use to help motivate people and to help alter the affective experience. I think there's easy things like outdoors, indoors. There's easy things like music, other people, mindfulness, imagery, and any strategy that works for that specific individual. You always have to throw that in, right? Because they're unique. But this is important if we're thinking about altering the affective experience so that we can alter the adherence to the physical activity, right? This is important. Fulbright Part 2. I wish I had another 45 minutes to talk about this. I appreciate I don't. So we're going to spend a little less time on this. But this is the brain stimulation part. Remember, I was focused in on the brain and all the factors that influence the brain. Well, what if we could just stimulate the brain, right, directly? Is there any possibility that we could alter somebody's thoughts or emotions? Well, I knew there was, and I knew there was some work out there. But I never thought about doing this work until about 3 years ago when a doctoral student came to me, Bhushan Bakar, and wanted to look at pain in particular using transcranial magnetic stimulation, and Dr. Machado talked about this a little bit last week. I'll show some redundant slides here, but we'll go through those quickly. But for pain, well, I thought, is pain similar to discomfort from physical activity? Well, where pain is processed, there are some aspects where the pathways overlap. So I thought, well, I could learn about this stuff. And that's why I decided that I'm gonna work with Bhushan on this, and I'm gonna figure this out a little bit. Along the way, and very recently, I think a month ago or 3 or 4 weeks ago, Bhushan and I and Dr. Peterson from VCU published this article, a really nice little article about the impact of TMS for pain with patients that are suffering from diabetic neuropathy. Right? This is a group of patients where they suffer pain and medications often either don't work or only work for a short period and then they're still in pain. So they need some help, and we decided to do a project with them. And we found some positive results. Not quite perfect, but definitely worth doing further research, and I think in the end finding how they can benefit most. I should also mention that in September, about 2 weeks ago, Bhushan was in Portugal and presented his research. In Portugal. Interestingly, he and I were on a Zoom call either this week or the end of last week, both trying to talk Portuguese. Not pretty, but we had fun anyways. Again, it was going back to this. Like I would study all this, and I was crazy about how all this worked. So now I wanted to see, well, if we stimulate what regions, how, why would this happen, and trying to transfer that into TMS, and that really was a bit of the publication that happened here. And again, all about this perceived affect. Well, what happens when we stimulate the cranium? I'm not going to go through this. This was something that Dr. Machado presented, I do want to say that it's FDA approved. That's kind of a big deal in the US. Once you get that, you can get insurance companies to pay for the treatment, and it really elevates the use of this protocol. When we look at TDCS, it uses a low weak electrical current, different than a magnetic field, and it alters neuromodulation. Now what that means is it alters the polarization of the cell, so that in general it's more likely to fire, right? It doesn't fire. TMS fires, right? I can put it, boom, and I can twitch a muscle very easily. Not with TDCS. Just so that there's some little differences here. Again, this is what transcranial magnetic stimulation, these machines, this is what they look like. Many different machines. And all of them are pretty scary to look at. You look at it, you go, boy, yeah, I think they're doing something special here, right? This is TDCS, but I show you this picture because this is, you can buy this. Like you can go online and buy this. In England, they sell these very often. And I don't know if they're sold in Brazil very much, but I don't think so. In addition, you can get it on Amazon. For us, we have Amazon in the US, but you can buy a device very similar to the previous picture, and you can buy it on Amazon. And the range of prices is pretty interesting, from about $70 or $80 to about $250. The 250s look beautiful. They look like this. They're very wonderful devices, right? And then our research devices look a little more like this, right? Even though they're always changing and they're always adapting, and it's hard to keep up with the new flashy research tool that we also have. For the Fulbright, I decided to come up with a comparison of the transcranial direct current versus magnetic stimulation. These can be found in the literature. We found these comparison studies throughout the literature. So it wasn't tremendously hard to find this kind of information. I just had to put it in a table. But here we see the thing that I was interested in is imagine if TDCS was effective. Imagine if it was. You could buy it for $250 and you can treat yourself. And remember, people are doing it right now, right? And all the reports online, right, show that it can be effective. The self-reporting is very positive. Now, for the people that it doesn't work for, they just don't report it, right? Because it doesn't hurt, right? It's very safe. By the way, transcranial magnetic stimulation isn't always safe. You have to take many steps and many protocols to make sure that it's safe. Again, FDA approved over here for TMS, not FDA approved in the US anyways. So there are many mechanistic challenges. I'm not going to go over these right now, but there are many mechanistic challenges. And this is coming from an article by Machado and Amiri that just came out on Monday. Right? I finally got a chance to read it on Tuesday and realized I could use this. Right? So I've kind of reworded some of this for a little more general understanding. But clearly there are direct targets of investigation to figure out how we can make TDCS or understand why it is that TDCS is effective in some studies and not effective in others. There are several targets that can lead us to a better understanding. And these are some of those. And this is really where I know Dr. Machado, because we've shared a brief WhatsApp back and forth, but this is going to direct his research for maybe the rest of his life. He's looking at me with, I think he's going to solve this in a couple of years, so it won't be the rest of his life. But this really is the kind of trigger that made me think we need to do a study together. That we need to figure, we can do something to go a little further down the road and figure this out. And sure enough, that's what brought me here. So what to do first to clarify the effectiveness of TDCS? I read this study and I thought, this is pretty cool. It looks like Dr. Machado is going down this road to try to tease out some of the factors or variables that help us understand why it's effective and not effective. And indeed, this study showed us some of that. And I used it as one of the studies to propose the study that we would be doing together. This is a statement taken from the Fulbright proposal. We're going to examine the effectiveness of TDCS at 2 different regions of the brain. Prefrontal cortex, and M1, on psychophysiological responses to physical activity in males and females. I can tell you that we've already changed the purpose a little bit to identify a more distinct, unique piece of the puzzle that we can insert into all the literature. So we're changing, and we're continuing to think, well, maybe we should do this, how about this, and having those kinds of discussions. But we're getting close to, I think, nailing it down for sure. So to summarize, exercise is medicine. I would state that, or propose that exercise is low-cost medicine, right? Adherence to regular physical activity is influenced by the affective experience during the activity. So what are we going to do about that? That becomes a challenge. Meaningfulness of the physical activity, the why, can influence the balance between reflective evaluation and automatic impulse, right? I think that's really important. Individualized strategies to score a positive affective experience to the physical activity choice is a self-selected intensity, at a self-selected intensity. That's always, almost for every human being, it's going to be below the threshold, because we don't want to go beyond the threshold. If we're prescribing the intensity, we don't know if we're above the threshold or below. But if we ask them, they're self-selected, 99.99% of the time, it's below. So we're fine, right? And we're getting an affective response that's reinforcing to them because they're identifying it as such. It's not too hard, right? And then TDCS, the quest for valid, reliable, and accessible brain stimulation technology to enhance, I leave it blank, anything, everything, all kinds of things. It's being used for everything. We're not so sure if it's effective on everything, but we need to learn a lot more to fill in the blank there. That's it. Isn't it? Yeah, I'm done. Look at this. I really like that. I'm so thrilled.